When we talk about UFC fighters, it's easy to focus on knockouts, titles, and highlight reels. But behind the gloves and bright lights are stories of survival, pain, redemption, and resilience that go way beyond fighting. These are the fighters who turn trauma, poverty, and even near death into fuel, and their backstories are just as legendary as their careers. Mark Hunt. From street fights to K1 glory, Mark Hunt, known as the Super Samoan, was born in 1974 in New Zealand into a big Samoan family.
You know, I feel I'm the best fighter on the planet. I always have felt like I'm the best fighter on the planet. And probably the day that I stop feeling like that is the day that I'll stop fighting. Well, in the zone means like, you know, it could be a 5-minute fight, a 10-minute round fights.
But behind closed doors, his childhood was filled with violence. His father was abusive, and the beatings were so severe that sometimes he and his siblings missed weeks of school. In his autobiography, Hunt recalled being tied up and whipped until his skin ripped open, beaten with rods, belts, and broomsticks. The trauma never left him. He says even the smell of cleaning products today can bring him back to those nights. With rage bottled up inside, Hunt turned to the streets, where his knockout power became feared in back alley fights across Auckland. But fate stepped in one night outside a nightclub. After knocking out several men in a brawl, a bouncer noticed his raw talent and offered him a shot at training in a real gym. That moment changed everything. Hunt went from fighting in alleys to winning the prestigious K1 World Grand Prix in 2001. He later transitioned to MMA, beating legends in Pride and eventually headlining UFC events against the likes of Stipe Miocic, Frank Mir, and Roy Nelson. For Hunt, fighting wasn't just about wins and losses. It was survival. Martial arts gave him discipline, healing, and a way to channel the pain of his past. But Hunt's journey of transformation was just the beginning, because halfway across the world, another man was digging sand under the blistering African sun, dreaming of something greater.
Whoa, Tom Aspinall, good one?
Huh?
Tom Aspinall, maybe?
Who?
Tom Aspinall?
No.
Okay, fair enough. I asked Eric the same.
Francis Ngannou. From sand mines to heavyweight king, Francis Ngannou grew up in a tiny village in Cameroon. By the age of 10, he was already working in sand mines with nothing but a shovel and bucket, spending hours in the scorching sun to help his family survive. Poverty wasn't just part of life, it was life. But Francis had bigger dreams. Despite his parents telling him to be realistic, he wanted more. At 22, he discovered boxing. But when illness forced him to stop, he realized if he stayed, his future was already written. So he made a choice: leave for Europe, chase opportunity, and risk everything. With no money or passport, he traveled crammed in broken-down cars, walking for days without food or water. He even admitted drinking his own sweat just to stay alive. Many who started the journey with him didn't make it. It took him 6 failed attempts before finally crossing from Morocco into Spain on a raft. When he got there, he was thrown into a detention center. Eventually, he made it to Paris, but life didn't get easier. Homeless, sleeping in parking lots with no job and no language skills, Ngannou seemed stuck again. That's when he walked into a local gym and met coach Fernand Lopez. He wanted to box, but Lopez steered him toward MMA. With food, shelter, and a chance to train, Ngannou exploded onto the scene. Just 2 years after his debut, the UFC came calling. In 2021, Ngannou's journey came full circle. From digging sand mines in Cameroon to knocking out Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title. His story is proof that no dream is too big, no matter how impossible it seems. Heinisch. From drug mule to UFC fighter, Heinisch's life looked promising at first.
And so it's really been a game changer for me, being able to recover at my house every night after a day of training or just a long day of being on your feet.
Growing up in Colorado, he was a gifted wrestler, even becoming a high school state champion and 2-time All-American. But after college, his focus slipped. With his parents splitting and financial struggles mounting, Ian fell into the wrong crowd. What started as partying turned into drug dealing. He escalated fast, running thousands of ecstasy pills across state lines and even smuggling cocaine from South America into Europe. Luxury hotels, wild parties, and dirty money became his new lifestyle. But it all came crashing down when he was arrested in Spain with drugs hidden inside suitcases. Sentenced to prison, Ian had two choices: waste away or change. Behind bars, he found faith, trained daily, and even learned Spanish and a new style of wrestling. When he returned to the US, old wounds landed him in jail again. But instead of breaking him, it made him hungrier for redemption.
Script to a Hollywood blockbuster. A high school All-American wrestler with a bright future finds himself pulled into the drug trade world, goes on the run to avoid jail time, but ultimately gets captured and sent to prison.
By 2015, he threw himself into MMA. Just 3 years later, he scored a knockout on Dana White's Contender Series and signed with the UFC. From drug mule to UFC middleweight, Heinisch's journey proves that even the darkest paths can lead to redemption if you fight your way out. Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man. Ken Shamrock's story starts with abandonment. Born in 1964, his father left when he was just 5. By 10 years old, Ken had already been stabbed in a street fight. He bounced between foster homes, group homes, and the streets, until finally landing at the Shamrock Ranch Boys' Home, run by Bob Shamrock. Bob introduced him to sports and discipline. Ken threw himself into wrestling and football, and when injuries killed his football dream, he turned to fighting. By the early 90s, Ken moved to Japan, where he became one of the pioneers of Pancrase, an early MMA organization. In 1993, he stepped into UFC 1, fighting in a tournament that changed combat sports forever. His battles with Royce Gracie and Dan Severn became the stuff of legend, and he was soon nicknamed the world's most dangerous man. Ken headlined over 15 UFC and Pride events, cementing his legacy as one of MMA's original superstars. His story shows how structure and mentorship can transform even the most troubled kid into a legend. Jose Aldo, scarred but unbreakable. Jose Aldo's story begins with tragedy. As a baby during a heated family moment, his crib was accidentally thrown onto a lit barbecue, burning his face permanently. Growing up in the Amazon, his family was so poor that some days they went without food. At 17, Aldo left home with nothing but his fight gear and a dream. He slept on gym floors, trained non-stop, and clawed his way up the ranks. In 2009, he became the first UFC featherweight champion and held the title for more than 5 years. Aldo went from a scarred child in poverty to one of the most respected champions in UFC history. His rise was fueled not just by skill, but by a will to endure.
Also, McGee. Você tá doido? Chama.
Alex Pereira, from addiction to double champion. Alex Pereira grew up in poverty in Brazil, working at a tire shop by age 12. He also developed a dangerous alcohol addiction, drinking a bottle a day as a teenager. At 22, he walked into a kickboxing gym to escape that spiral, and it saved his life. His raw striking talent turned him into a glory double champion, even beating Israel Adesanya twice in kickboxing. But the money wasn't enough. Then Adesanya dismissed him as not a real fighter who couldn't hang in the UFC. Pereira took it personally. By 2022, he shocked the world by knocking Adesanya out in MMA to claim the middleweight title. Within a year, he moved up, won the light heavyweight belt, and became the fastest double champion in UFC history. From alcoholism to two-division glory, Pereira's story is about proving the doubters wrong over and over again. Jorge Masvidal. From car seats to street fights, Jorge Masvidal grew up in Miami, with his father imprisoned when he was just 4. His mother worked multiple jobs, and at times they were so poor they lived out of a car. Masvidal turned to backyard street fights for cash, building a reputation online through viral videos. Those brawls led him into MMA gyms, where he sharpened his skills. After years grinding in promotions like Strikeforce and Bellator, he finally made it to the UFC. His career exploded in 2019 when he delivered the fastest knockout in UFC history, 5 seconds against Ben Askren. From car seats to global fame, Masvidal became the embodiment of street fighting turned professional. Kimbo Slice, the backyard brawler. Kevin Ferguson, better known as Kimbo Slice, grew up in Florida after moving from the Bahamas. When Hurricane Andrew destroyed his home in 1992, he lived out of a car. To make ends meet, he bounced between jobs. Bouncer, bodyguard, anything to survive. But Kimbo's life changed when his backyard fights hit the internet. His bare-knuckle brawls went viral on YouTube, making him an underground legend. In 2007, he turned pro in MMA, beating legends like Ray Mercer and Tank Abbott. Though his UFC run was brief, Kimbo became one of the first fighters to bring mainstream attention to MMA. He passed away in 2016 at just 42, but his legacy as the original Street King still lives on, carried now by his son Baby Slice. Charles Oliveira, from poverty to records. Charles Oliveira was born in Brazil into crushing poverty. At 7, he developed rheumatic fever and a heart murmur. So severe, doctors thought he might never walk again. His parents sold snacks and cardboard in the streets to pay for treatment. At 12, a neighbor introduced him to free jiu-jitsu classes. Within months, Oliveira was winning tournaments. By 17, he turned pro in MMA, fighting multiple times in one night on Brazil's regional scene. His UFC journey was rocky. Missed weight cuts, tough losses, constant setbacks, but he refused to quit. In 2018, he reinvented himself with improved striking and went on an 11-fight win streak. In 2021, he knocked out Michael Chandler to become lightweight champion. Today, Oliveira holds records for most submission wins, 16, most finishes, 20, and most performance bonuses in UFC history. From nearly crippled as a child to record-breaking champion, Oliveira is living proof of resilience. Matt Brown and McGee, redemption in blood and sweat. Matt Brown grew up restless in Ohio, falling into drugs and nearly dying from a heroin overdose, clinically dead for almost 2 minutes. Friends nicknamed him the Immortal, and instead of becoming a tombstone story, he turned to MMA. With highlight reel knockouts and brutal comebacks, Brown became one of the most beloved knockout artists in UFC welterweight history. McGee's journey was just as intense. After a car crash, he spiraled into painkillers, alcohol, and heroin. He overdosed and was clinically dead for 8 minutes before being revived. Rehab saved him, and by 2010 he fought his way through the Ultimate Fighter to win a UFC contract. Both men turned death into motivation and fighting into redemption. For them, just being alive and sober was the biggest victory of all. From Mark Hunt's alleyway fights in New Zealand, to Francis Ngannou's sand mines in Cameroon, to Charles Oliveira's hospital bed in Brazil, these fighters proved that the fight doesn't start in the cage. It starts long before, in the struggles that forge champions. So which of these backstories hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more incredible fight stories every week.